All right, so this is Iraq lecture 5. Still staying with the topic of women, but in this case, moving over to some of the women, a couple of the women's voices, dealing with a couple of women's voices who were living in Iraq at the time, and also taking a chance to just begin looking at some of the Joe Sacco images, which are in journalism. So the first topic here is war stress. I'll put up the slide here of what I'm going to talk about. This lecture called Other Women, Same War. And this is, one of the things you have to remember is that these people were all in the same country at the same time, but it hardly looks like it, right? Because basically their experiences are so vastly different that it's hard to really put together that this actually happened not only at the same time but in the same place. Anyway, our point of entry in war stories is often film, I think, increasingly, and it's typically American film or film that has come, out of the American sort of film machine, one way or another, whether it's independent or not. I know independent filmmakers wouldn't be happy about me describing it that way, because there's certainly nothing easy about making an independent film. But it's a lot harder than, say, making an independent film or making a film in a place like Belgium or... So, but anyway, these American texts which inform us basically are problematic because it means that mostly they're combat films. And unless they're about the Civil War, they don't show American civilians because there are no American civilians in the places that America goes to fight. I mean, it goes to fight in Vietnam, it goes to fight in Korea, it goes to fight in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the Americans that are there are soldiers, right? And so especially it doesn't show women civilians. There may be, occasionally you will see in some films, like in The Green Zone, directed by Paul Greengrass, which was, again, a reasonable film. It was pretty soft about. I mean, it was based in an excellent book by, oh Christ, now I've forgotten his name, called Imperial Life in the Emerald City by Chandrasekharan, and that's who it was, Rajiv Chandrasekharan. An excellent book. I mean, readable, funny, ironic, just beautifully written. And I highly recommend it. If you think, oh, I can't read, it's like, no, it's a very fine book. But it's still that. But the movie that came out of it is sort of ostensibly, at least it has the same name, The Green Zone. The Green Zone is a zone in Iraq, in Baghdad, which was basically turned into a little piece of America, and it was so heavily fortified that there was this labyrinth that you had to get through to get in. So a truck bomb couldn't get in there. I mean, there were so many. They just started getting you ready to get into the Green Zone miles ahead of where the zone actually starts, and the security around it was enormously tight. So that's used as an exemplar, basically, of how America dealt with the natives. Like, they didn't live in Baghdad. They made a piece of America, and that's where they settled down. Okay. But the film's still very soft on the politicians, and it's the politicians that I'm after. The point of this sidebar here is that to talk about, who are the civilians that are in these war zones. Well, they're politicians, and the ambassador and the ambassador's people, and the civil servants who basically are there to do the bidding of the government, because that's what civil servants do. And the job is, that the governments come and go, but civil servants stay and do the job. And so they're the civilians, basically, who are on point, usually from the State Department. So you can see how they behave. The other civilians that you're going to find, not many of them in a war zone like this, and there will be women there. There will be women civilians from the State Department, of course, too. But the other civilian women you'll find who are American or British, Canadian, French, German, and so on are journalists, of course. But that's dangerous. So for the most part, what you're looking at is women, civilians who are not American. So I've given us here pieces from Riverbend's books, Baghdad Burning, Girl Blog from Iraq, which was published in 2005. It was a collection of her blog up to that point. And then Baghdad Burning 2, more Girl Blog from Iraq, which was published a year later. And I've given it to us for a number of reasons. First, is that she really brings home the daily toil and weariness of surviving in a war zone. So much of the time is sucked up in just getting necessities taken care of, getting water, which is a huge issue. They obviously have a tank on the roof, and they have to fill the tank, which means that then there's gravity feed water in the household. But it has to be filled. So that means the water has to be walked up, whatever it is, 2 or 3 flights, and then it has to be loaded into this tank. And that's probably going to take half a day to do. Somebody's got to get gas for the car. Well, those lines in Iraq were 13 hours long. I mean, you just went and put your car in the line, and then you waited. And you had to wait because you were just going to move ahead a little bit, and then nothing, you turn the car off. And you'd wait 10 to 12 to 13 hours, and the gas was being dispensed. You still had to pay for it, but it was being dispensed under the auspices of the Americans. I mean, basically what was happening was that the Iraqis were dispensing gas, but Americans had to go and protect the gas stations from being blown up. So they were going to pull guard duty. So here you have an American bunch of vehicles that are loggered up around a gas station, and they're all on point. They're all ready for a fight, and everybody's trying hard to stay alert and so on. And you're just sitting there waiting, and it's like next, and then they run out of gas. And you gotta wait. People would just go and you just stay in line for 8 hours, and then somebody else from the family would come along, and you'd go home and get some food, and they would stay in the car. And remember, we're talking about Iraq, 120-degree heat, right? And desert heat, so it's going to dry you out. So you're going to feel crappy. And you can't leave the car, right? So this is and you got to get cooking oil or gas, because otherwise no heat for cooking in the house. These are usually the kinds of canisters you would see if you're used to being cottaging or somewhere going camping or something like that. Small gas canisters. Well, these are big gas canisters. So you got to get that recharged. Ceiling windows which have been blown in, mending things that have been broken in the daily sort of operation of the war. Windows get blown in. Ideally, people don't get killed, and then you have to find some wood to put over the windows and tape it up or whatever it is. So this is one of the things that I think really comes across well in her day-to-day. And she's she's such a, she's funny, and she's smart, and she's interesting, and she's just such a good witness, and she's such an interesting person, and she's very likable, and so that's sort of a sidebar. So that's the first thing, is sort of just getting the day-to-day stuff. The second thing is that you get a clear sense of how terrifyingly unpredictable things are in a war zone, how there are these long stretches of tedium which are broken by minutes, sometimes hours of absolute panic and terror, where you may not have time for your own panic because the children are panicking. You've got, in her case, she and her brother sort of basically take over running the household, and there seem to be younger children in the household as well, which means that they have to make sure that they're okay. Because they may stop eating. They may be too terrified. They may not sleep. They may not eat, and so on. If you're an adult, you can say, well, you have to try to eat something. At least try this. And so But if you're a child, it's like, no, you may just not do it. You may not be able to eat. You may not be able to talk yourself down. You may just be in such a state of terror that you throw up, and so you don't want to lose a child because they essentially became so stressed out they couldn't survive. And finally, this is the third thing, is that this is one of the early war blogs, and it gave people in Western countries a beautifully written, often hilarious, and usually upsetting account of the war on the ground from the point of view of an ally, right? Because that's the thing about Riverbend, is that she's not some, down with the, anti-imperialist, down with the Americans. And she's just like, no, yeah, Saddam was a bad guy, but at the same time, look at this, what a disaster this thing is. And she's politically aware as well. She reads the political news, and she's trying to figure out, okay, what is this council they're creating, and can women sit on it, and what are they going to do about, like, because she was a software engineer, what are they going to do about, will she be able to go back to work? Is there going to be work for women, or are they going to be forced back into essentially this is going to become forbidden, and so on. So it gave us access. You could actually look up her blog on a daily basis and see, well, what happened to Riverbend today. And this was the story the press couldn't get. They could not get this. And even if they could get it, they wouldn't print it. I mean, they'd print parts of it that they liked, but they weren't going to print the whole thing that Riverbend put out. And you don't have to buy the books. You can read all the stuff that my memory is the last time I looked, which is probably a year ago now. It's been cached by somebody, so it's all still online. So if you just want to, read her whole blog, absolutely, knock yourself out. And I recommend it. I mean, I actually would buy the books because it in some way supports her, as far as we know. And what happens when you read all of Riverbend, which I certainly hope that you would do, is that, but it's times are crazy, so maybe for the future, is that I think you will find yourself concerned for her.